The challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of faith. Nearly 60 years later, during these challenging times, we'll take a new look at our divisions, our connections, in a new program called Challenge 2.0. The COVID virus has produced not a single symptom, but many. Not a single outcome, but as we know all too well, a range from minor infections to serious illness to death. And there will not be a single way to exit the lockdown, not for states, not for cities, nor for individuals, even us. We will each have our own unique physical, emotional, and spiritual exits. How well we craft them will determine our health and our resilience in the months to come. That task is the subject of this edition of Challenge 2.0. We're delighted for this program to have the perspectives and the wisdom of the three members of the Daughters of Abraham. Thank you each for joining us. If I can introduce each of them in turn. Anila Afzali, who's the Executive Director of the American Muslim Empowerment Network, which is located at the Muslim Association of Puget Sound in Redmond. Anila, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
We have Reverend Dr. Kelle Brown, pastor at Plymouth Church in Seattle. Kelle, thank you very much for joining us today as well.
It's my pleasure.
And Rabbi Johanna Kinberg from Congregation Kolami, which I believe is now in Kirkland, and also a member of the Daughters of Abraham. Johanna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
As we see the restrictions eased, and we're already beginning to hear that there are certain restrictions that are going to be lifted within a matter of days, as of the time we're recording this, how do you see each of your faith communities responding? How do you see them changing what has become the norm over the last month and a half? Johanna, perhaps you could begin with responding to that.
We've been having a lot of conversations in our community at individual levels and also on a communal level about what has this experience taught us? What are we learning? Because we're in the middle of it. What do we want to leave behind, and what do we want to carry forward in terms of moving forward? And we've decided, at least as our congregation, is we don't want to stop connecting digitally through Zoom after this is over, meaning we might be having like a big screen in the sanctuary with the little faces and the quilt, what we call the quilt of people faces, up with the people, because what we realized is how isolated so many people are, how hard it is for people to make it to where they want to go all the time because of the complexity of our area, our density, our traffic, health. Now we can see that people can, there's an egalitarianism in some ways, at least in our community where most people have digital access to being able to participate. And so we've just really seen an increased participation in some ways from people who really wanted to be a part of the community but couldn't for a variety of reasons, which means, those of us who are the most vulnerable and maybe have the most limitations, maybe they're the people we should be paying attention to when we're making decisions about how we build our community. And I think that really is a huge lesson for us, is to really think about the vulnerable, what that means in our society. Who is vulnerable? What does that mean in our society? I think about it within the context of the Bible all the time. That's my direction. And this experience also begs that question is, are we taking care of the vulnerable? Are we building our communities for them? And so that's been a real lesson for us. All three of our congregations, mine probably is the smallest, but we get large groups of people together. Like that's a big part of what we do. So for our next big holiday, we're thinking, do we go to a drive-in, and we, so we're all together, but in our individual cars. I mean, as Kelle said, really thinking creatively. It's a civilizational challenge in for each of our traditions, but amazing things are going to come out of this, because the young people. This is very formative for them in all of our communities. Think about the 10-year-old or even the 20-year-old,
Mm.
how this is forming them and how these are the next leaders of our faith traditions. And I'm just really, excited in many ways because this is hard, but also we're doing so much, at least in Washington State, to keep people safe,
Yeah.
that a lot of the young people are not going to be physically harmed by this themselves, just by the nature of what's already happening in our communities, which means that they will go through this experiencing difficulty, but maintaining their own health, God willing, and that which I think it means that a lot of creativity will come from that nexus.
Absolutely.
Anila, how about your faith community? How do you see them transforming, changing as we exit lockdown?
Sure. Well, I want to start by saying that I'm really hoping and praying that the lockdown will be over in time for Eid, our big celebration at the end of Ramadan. So it's wonderful to have the sort of isolation for the purposes of achieving what Ramadan teaches us. But Eid is about celebration. It's about getting together in community. And I really hope that we will be able to do that. I certainly want to go get together with my family, but then also my friends and community members as well. And also, we have to think about how are we going to do it, because it's not going to be, as the governor said, it's not going to be a switch like the on-off. It's going to be an easing of sort of social distancing measures. So what is that going to mean, even if we were out of lockdown at a certain phase for Eid? What is that going to mean for the large gatherings that we normally have? So at MAPS, we normally have 3 to 4 different prayer services for Eid, which is the way we launch our celebration. We do a prayer first. So those prayer services, each one gets about 2,000 people. And we have it super packed. People fill the hallways, put prayer mats on the hallways. We put tarps outside. People are praying. So it is an inundation of people, including a lot of people who never practice throughout the year, who show up for that Eid prayer. So knowing that, and knowing that we likely will not be able to do that kind of large gathering, what is it going to mean for us, and how are we going to adapt and select, sort of who can come or how many people or anything else like that, is going to be some difficult decisions that faith communities within the Muslim community and others are going to have to decide and sort of see how we can best do that. At the same time, like Rabbi Johanna said, for us as well, there have been some real benefits that have come out of the online platforms that we've used because of COVID-19. And I hope some of those, if not all, will continue well beyond the pandemic as well. We've also had certain people who otherwise might not show up to a mosque be able to listen in and participate and benefit from some of our services, some of our sermons, or otherwise some of the spiritual boosts that we've had. And that's been wonderful. We've had people tell us that too, that, hey, I don't normally show up to the mosque, but because it's online, I'm now able to participate. We have access to more people around the globe to listen to bring them in as scholars, local, national, and international scholars as well. That has been really beneficial for local communities. And I would suspect, especially for smaller organizations or institutions that otherwise might not have access to bring a well-known speaker to their community. So I think there's that benefit as well. But the other part that I hope we do change is really looking at the situation of normal. Like I don't want us to just return to normal, return to what we were like before this pandemic, because normal has never been okay for so many different communities, marginalized groups, and individuals. Right. So how do we really give thought to not just easing our own social restrictions as we come out of this, but how do we ease the inequities in our system? How do we ease the burden of those who carry the most, who've risked their lives through this pandemic even? How do we help support them? What are we doing now? What do we need to be doing once we come out of this to kind of address some of the social ills and the inequities that are built into our system? Those are the questions that I think we really need to grapple with. And I think a lot of the decisions we make now will influence and impact that. Like I know right now in the city of Seattle, there's a tax being considered on some of the biggest businesses, and whether or not something like that to help provide relief and help address this growing gap of the haves and the have-nots, I think is critical for us to take this kind of bold action now to be able to be stronger coming out of this, because we have this huge triple threat right now. The public health emergency with COVID-19, we have the housing and homelessness crisis that has just been exacerbated because so many people face the prospect prospect of losing their jobs or have lost their jobs and sources of income. And we have now the economy, the jobs and income emergency as well. So how are we as faith communities going to be part of the solution? I will say that at MAPS, we launched a comprehensive response to COVID-19 that specifically included a relief work component. We increased our investment. We have provided over $100,000 in direct benefit and services to help people with their rent and utility assistance before the rent moratorium went into place. We've been doing food distributions. We've been providing telemedical services for free and a free virtual legal clinic. We've been doing all of this through our Muslim Community Resource Center, which is our social services and humanitarian arm of MAPS. And I know many other groups as well of all faith backgrounds have also been stepping up to this challenge and doing their part to really lift up the vulnerable, really put into action our faith values of helping those in need, of loving our neighbors and doing our part. But we really need to also change the system and make sure that it isn't just up to charity. It is actually, this is a time of solidarity, and I hope we come out of this with a greater strengthened sense of solidarity and understanding what that means by putting that solidarity into action and achieving more equitable and just measures in our city, state, and country.
And Kelle, as we move beyond lockdown, at least in a staged fashion, how do you see that changing, and how do you see your response to that at Plymouth Church?
So as my sisters have said, we hope that, I pray as the faith leader that this is an opportunity to hold on to what is dear, but to look at normal and say that that's not what we want to return to. Mm-hmm. This is an opportunity for us to truly see the gifts of what have happened over this time. We have had people delivering food to one another. We have been making masks. My daughter herself, while attending University of Washington, has made so many masks for Odessa Brown Clinic and is sending masks all over the country to people. And so this has really been a return to the bartering of community, to caring for one another, to having compassion for one another, to really wanting to respond and not assume that people have the resources to take care of themselves. And so Plymouth Church has in many ways been experiencing resurrection, because this has been an opportunity for us to remember again that we belong to one another and that we are truly relying on one another, not only to impact our isolation or our anxiety, our worry, for indeed we have increased our prayer life and all of that, but we are truly taking care of the practical things like mourning with those who have passed on while we've been in quarantine, and taking care of ourselves and undoing the largely hierarchical way of leadership and the way that we have been doing business as usual. All of that is being dismantled before our eyes. We have truly learned that we're going to have to rely not just on those who have ordinarily been on top of the pyramid. We're relying on the custodians. We're relying on the people who are getting out our newsletter and doing our website, and so, we truly have restored the ways that that we can be together without the sort of features of system and oppression that supremacy that we usually have enacted. So I am grateful for that. When we will hold on to many things, because as you said, Johanna, that we are noticing the inequity. We are seeing people that haven't been in our community for years because they haven't been able to get to us. We're seeing people who we weren't aware were away from us, who were showing up in the little squares, and we're the Brady Bunch again. So we can say, hey, we haven't seen you in years. There are people showing up for worship services from France, from Oklahoma, from Arkansas. There are people who are attending worship all day because they don't want to miss the wonderful worship experiences that are happening in New York, and then they go to Chicago, and then they go to Texas, and then they come to us. So it has been an incredible resurgence of energy certainly because people are in despair, certainly because people are experiencing anxiety and worry with the lack of comforting leadership from the top places in our community. You know, the need for our communities has become so much more apparent. But it has been a chance for us to see that we can't let this go. There are people who want to be tuning into us, whether we are in a time of pandemic or not. And so we have decided to truly make sure that we are continuing the ways that we reach out. And also in terms of justice, the interesting thing for me is that I'm have always, because of my own walk with being an African American woman from the South, you know, my eyes, and I dare say my sister's eyes, have always been watching God, but we've also been listening for the voices that haven't been heard, and we've also been watching for those who are most vulnerable. And so for me, I'm going to be going to my leadership to say we need to be buying hotspots, because who are we not seeing in worship because they don't have internet? We need to be buying devices, you know, so that those of us, we have millionaires in my church, yes, but we also have people who are unhoused. And so how are we making sure that we are connected with those whose voices we haven't heard and where we aren't seeing because of the divide of not having access to technology? Our library is closed, where many of our folks would go to access technology. So this is an opportunity for us to truly think about the least and the last, and those that God is calling for us to uplift during this time and empower, so that we can truly be community, not just who we're hearing and seeing, but remembering those that we do not.
Each of you have cited examples of how your faith communities have adapted to the shelter in place, the lockdown. It's called by a variety of different names. But there have been some well-publicized examples of faith leaders defying the restrictions, actually continuing to invite members of their communities, in some cases even providing buses to gather for group services of some sort. Perhaps share your reaction when you first heard of those instances.
It actually just saddened me, because I'm like, there are people literally risking their lives every single day. The healthcare workers who are out there saving lives, grocery store workers, and so many other essential workers who don't have the option to shelter in place or stay at home. So they're out there risking their lives, and to see people putting them at bigger risk, you know, increasing the risk for all of us, and really sort of ensuring that the stay-at-home requirements last much longer than they might otherwise last. So I was really disappointed and heartbroken to see that kind of response by people protesting at a time when we really should be in this together and worry about the safety and health of entire communities.
I'm going to address this next question to you not only as three leaders of faith communities, but three women leaders of the larger community. It has been noted that the most successful national responses to the COVID infections, in terms of preventing very high infection rates and certainly high death rates, have been in nations led by women. What do you make of that? Are there any messages that you think the rest of us should be perceiving out of that fact? Kelle, you're on screen, so let me begin with you.
Johanna and Anila, I promise I will follow you anywhere.
Oh my God.
Yes, I feel the same.
Water in the desert. Oh my goodness, you're like water in the desert. It is hard not to be emotional because I miss you both, and this is a tremendous gift to me. I'm so grateful to be with you all today, and thanks, Jeff, for convening us. I'm grateful.
I would agree the same thing. I would follow any one of you three. And it's just really a joy and an honor to be a part of this. And I'm just so grateful that you agreed to participate in this.
I'm looking to my sisters because I'm like, I have a feeling we're going to be pretty much in agreement here. I want to just lift up the women leaders around the world who have responded and cared for their people. I want to lift up the ones who have done, have sought their doctors, their scientists, who have looked to those who know more than others of us to get the best practices to make it through this time. And I think that the United States of America is learning, I pray that the United States of America is learning that we may have cut off our nose to spite our face. And I am not saying that it's simply because of a biological makeup that is woman. I am saying that there's something special about our leadership that is mothering, parenting, that is about nourishment, is about nurturing. And I think all of those qualities, though I'm not trying to say because I am as masculine as I am feminine, but I am saying that I think the leadership that we have rejected because we have not lost our lust as a country from misogyny and sexism, we have also lost the ability to be led by a person who could have been a woman who may have had a way through this that would have seen less deaths and would have prepared us better for what we have been encountering. So I'm grateful for countries that look for best leaders, not simply because of what genitalia they have. And I'm grateful that this may be an opportunity for us to see that we should be seeking the best leaders, even if they are, and especially in my opinion, because they are women.
Anila.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with my sisters, and the lesson for me is, hey, we need more women leaders across the globe. But having said that, the word for womb in Arabic is the same root as the word of one of the descriptions, one of the beautiful names of God, which is Rahma, which is mercy, which is compassion. You know, Rahma is the most merciful, the most compassionate. And this idea of the womb being something that provides that kind of mercy, that kind of compassion, it's, to me, I see sort of women being able to contribute this sense of mercy and compassion to the world. I'm not saying that men don't have that, they do as well. But at the same time, having more women leaders allows for more of this mercy and compassion, and having people who care for others, who care for the people, who put people first. And my reaction to seeing female leaders respond to this crisis was actually very similar to the reaction I had when I saw the New Zealand Prime Minister respond after the horrific attack, the massacre there at 2 mosques. And the kind of leadership, the swift leadership that really put the people's interests first and talked about how to save lives and uphold community well-being. I'm seeing that same response with some of the female leaders in response to the current pandemic. So for me, it's just great to see those examples, and I really hope and pray that we have more of those kinds of examples across the globe, including here in our own country. But I do want to also just mention one thing, or at least thank Kelle for uplifting Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and racism generally, specifically anti-Asian and of course anti-Black as always as well, as being sort of one of the really ugly aspects of this pandemic. That may or may not be getting as much attention as I think it should. I know with Islamophobia specifically, there have been a lot of fake videos even created blaming Muslims or attributing sort of false information to Muslims, to mosques, or otherwise, and these have been circulating across the internet, and they've really been promoting online Islamophobia. And then of course, we even have had the president make comments like something along the lines of Muslims might be treated differently during Ramadan versus Christians in Easter with their churches, which is again entirely untrue. But it's this kind of like feeding of this kind of hate and divisiveness that is really dangerous and deadly. And unfortunately, a lot of mainstream corporate media has also done that, whether willingly or unwillingly, by associating images of Muslims or mosques with the virus, you know, that have nothing to do with each other. There are stories that have nothing to do with a Muslim or with a mosque, but they have to do with the horrifying nature of this disease, of this outbreak, and then they'll have a picture of a mosque. And I really want to call that out as well, that it's really troubling to see, and it really leads to the further hate in our society. And again, we've seen the Zoom bombers and others show up and make horribly anti-Semitic comments, racist comments, anti-Black, anti-Asian. We've seen attacks on people who are of Asian ancestry, you know, because of the racism there. So we have seen all of these ugly forms of hate also be multiplied in certain ways during this pandemic.
Johanna?
In Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, the word for nurse is achot, which means sisters, because most of the nurses that Jewish people encountered were nuns, and that there was an association, and it has been, that also within Judaism that women were associated with healing. And one of the things that we're realizing in this country is that we have collectively neglected the body of American people, and that we don't care for each other's body, we don't care for each other's health, and that we are one system here. And when one of us becomes sick, if it's the right virus, a lot of us will become sick, and we need to work together as as one body to keep each other healthy. And that is, I think, it has been associated with women, but I think there's something that's out of balance, and it has to do with at its core, not uplifting and respecting the value of half of the population, and the unique gifts they bring, being other than male. And so that's, I think, that's something that's also, think about, there's so many women and men, but a lot more women probably than ever before, who are leaving their families and their children to go work to take care of the bodies of our fellow citizens.
That's right.
And that's very powerful, and their children are watching. And so that's, that is my hope for our country, is that we, if I was going to go back today, or advise a young person, I say go get a master's degree or a doctorate in public health, because that's what our country needs. Is we need public health care, caretakers, all of us.
Mhm. You have each brought up so many important points. One is that the new normal should not be the old normal. And I think also a reflection of the fact that there is our physical response to lockdown, to the end of the lockdown, but how do we respond to that internally, emotionally, and spiritually? And we are going to explore that in greater depth in our next edition of Challenge 2.0 next week. Anila, Johanna, and Kelle, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope all of you out there will join us for next week's version of Challenge 2.0.